Identify yourself.
I'm Gurinder Chadha, film writer, producer, and director.
Have you ever thought of changing your name to the woman who made Bend It Like Beckham? Because that is like the number one thing that you are recognised for.
Yes, absolutely. I know that. I know that in Australia for sure.
People were asking me just this morning, just as
Yeah.
I was coming in, who are you talking to this morning? And with respect, your name doesn't ring a bell.
No.
As soon as I say, you know, the movie Better Like Beckham, they're, oh my God, yeah. She's the one who made that. So instant recognition.
Yeah, I get that too with cab drivers. If I'm in a cab and they say, "Oh, what do you do?" I say, "Oh, movies." They go, "Oh, okay." Anything I would know, and then I toy with whether I should tell them some of my other titles, and then I say, "Actually, Bend It Like Beckham." They go, "Oh, you made that? Oh, I love that. My kids love that." La 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 la, and off it goes.
Okay, listen, I'm going to start off by what could be a very offensive question. How's that? Okay, you're a Sikh.
Yes.
My understanding from the Sikhs I have known
Yes.
is that one of your defining traits is modesty.
Yes.
I'm going to ask you to take your modesty hat off
Okay.
for a moment and just, in your own words, place yourself in British cinema. I want you to define the space that you think you occupy in British cinema.
Well, that's actually a very easy question to answer because 25 years ago I made my first feature film, Bhaji on the Beach, and I was the first Indian woman or Asian woman even in Britain to make a feature film. And then since then I've made 9 features. The last one, of course, is Viceroys House, my new film. And 25 years later, I'm still the only Indian woman making feature films in Britain. For a living. So that really sums up my contribution to British cinema.
Is that disappointing to you?
Yeah, it is, because I want to see other films that other people make from my perspective. I don't want to be the only one that has to represent everything and everyone all the time. So for me, it's, you know, I would love to see other films like Bend It Like Beckham, but made by other people, you know. And I try and work with writers, I try and encourage people, but I think to ultimately be a film director, you have to, and writer, you know, you have to have some chutzpah. You know, you know there are challenges. We all know there are challenges. Getting a movie made is hard. It's doubly hard if you're a woman, doubly hard if you're a person of colour, you know. But you have to find a way to tell your story, and you've got to employ all kinds of tactics to get there. And I think some people just think it's too hard and it's easier perhaps to be an accountant or a doctor or, you know, have a safe profession.
You have a production company.
Yes.
Bend It.
Yes.
TV.
Yes.
Which presumably is designed to help promote the agenda you have of having programs made that talk about the experience, the Indian British experience.
Yeah, well, I have, it's called Bend It Networks, and I have a Bend It Films, Bend It TV, and Bend It Stage, and Bend It Digital, in fact. And all those represent storytelling, and that's what I do. I tell stories from my unique perspective as a British Indian woman, but I try and make my films, my TV, whatever I do, I try and make it as commercially as possible because my audience, for me, is global. Another statistic that only I have, I'm the only person in the world to have this statistic, and that is that I'm the only Western filmmaker that has made a film that's been distributed in every single country in the world. And that was Bend It Like Beckham. And it even got a release in North Korea and an official release in China, not a bootleg, you know. So that's an amazing statistic because culturally, you know, what I do travels. It's just a shame that that more people don't get the opportunities to make those culturally specific films that I think audiences do want to see.
At a time when we're hearing a lot about the gender equality debate in Hollywood, I feel, having spoken to many British filmmakers who are women, that the amount of great female British directors isn't celebrated enough. I spoke to Susanna White
Oh,
a
yeah.
while ago, and I thought, where's the statue of her?
Yes, yes.
Generation Kill and all the rest of it.
Yes.
And you as well, maybe Britain is being too modest.
Yes, Sarah Gavron,
Yes.
you know, Andrea Arnold,
Oh my God, yeah.
Amma Santi. Yeah, there's a lot of, no, I wouldn't say there's a lot of us, but the few of us that are very strong and prolific and definitely have a voice, you know, and a vision. So that is to be celebrated, absolutely.
But in a nutshell, because it's the 70th anniversary of the, what do you call it? The
End of the British rule in
Right.
India and the independence of India and Pakistan.
So give it to us in a nutshell. Gurinder, how would you describe the film if you were to sell it in the foyer? In the foyer, someone's looking at the poster of your movie and they're looking at the poster for Fate and the Furious, and you want to convince them to go see your film. How do you sell it?
Well, Viceroys House is a sweeping, epic, historical, gorgeous-looking movie that is set in 1947 in the last days of the British Empire in India. And it follows the few months of the last Viceroy, who is Lord Mountbatten, played by Hugh Bonneville, and Edwina, played by Gillian Anderson, arriving in India and trying to hand the country back, but not realising what the mammoth task was in front of them. And by the time they had left, the country had been divided into two, and India was on one side and Pakistan had been created on the other. And my personal link to the story is that my family ended up being on the wrong side of the divide for us. We ended up being on the Pakistan side. So I overnight basically lost my ancestral homeland, and my grandmother, who was in my grandfather's house at the time with her 5 small children, basically had to leave with the clothes she was standing in.
What were you trying to redress with this film? Because it is very historically explicit in framing what's happening when and who's doing what to who.
Yeah.
One senses that you were trying to correct a popular impression of the petition.
Well, the film starts with a quote, which is, "History is written by the victors." And there's a particular history, the version of the British Empire of what happened that I grew up with and most of us grew up with. But my film is based on top secret British documents that tell an altogether different version of events as to why India was partitioned. I can't tell you what that is because I'm going to give away the ending.
Sure, I'm with you.
But I am taking on the British Empire here. I am taking on the likes of Winston Churchill and their version of history. And this is the first time a British film has been made on the subject since Gandhi, which was 35 years ago. But it's the first time also a British film has been made by an Indian, if you like, but being British, it's very much a combination of a British Indian upstairs, downstairs kind of sweeping movie that we make so well in Britain, those big costume dramas.
It's a nice balance between the politics and then the way that plays out with the staff, the huge staff of the house.
Yes, the film engine, if you like, is that the Mountbattens arrive, and upstairs in this massive palace, beautiful building built by Lutyens, and we shot in the real Viceroy's house, but also in the palace belonging to the Maharaja of Jodhpur. So it's a very sumptuous looking film, but we follow the Mountbattens negotiating the future of India with the Indian leaders, Gandhi, Nehru, Jinnah, and then we look at the impact of their negotiations and their decisions on their staff, their servants, you know, the butlers, the under valets, and so we see the impact of the politics of empire on the real Indians.
Okay, so you've got the idea for this film how many years ago now?
I got the idea actually 11 years ago when I did an episode of Who Do You Think You Are?
Right.
And I went to my ancestral homeland for the first time and saw my grandfather's house.
Okay, serious question. So you go ahead and make a very expensive, very labour-intensive historical drama.
Yeah.
You could have just gone off and crowdfunded a documentary.
Yes.
Why does a director consciously choose the former rather than the latter?
Because it's a different way of telling that story. You know, one gets to What I love about film, for me, I started out in radio as a radio news reporter, and I built my way up to being a film director. And what's great for me about film is that you can, drama, is that you can tell very multi-layered stories, because your actors can be doing something, but their actions can be saying something else. The sound can be saying something else to what the actors are doing. The camera could be picking something else up, So in a nutshell, it's so nuanced, and it's multi-layered. And if I'm telling stories that are multi-layered too, I make the context of the film feel something that you're used to, you're comfortable with, you find accessible, and then I come in and start subverting your expectations with my version of stories and my history, and that's really for me, storytelling through drama fiction really is superior. However, I have also made a documentary about the subject,
Okay.
For the BBC, which I've presented, and that'll be coming out in a few months.
Right, but people do, by and large, prefer to see true life stories mediated through actors and through script writing and through direction, don't they? If they have the choice, they would rather see a constructed, scripted film of an event rather than a documentary of an event. This is a topic that has come up with several filmmakers, that is the actual choice.
Well, I think it's because the industry pushes it like that, but there are fantastic documentaries that also do get seen, in the cinemas. But you're right, not as much as feature films. We live in that culture. I saw an amazing documentary on Bruce Springsteen, Darkness on the Edge of Town, about his creative process. I found it terribly moving, very dramatic. So I do think the documentary form is superior in its own way, and you can tell. With documentaries, you have the added stamp of truth, whereas with fiction, people think, oh, it's all made up, even though it might be based on truth.
What are the contemporary resonances that you want Viceroys House to have?
Well, when we started making the film 7 years ago, the world was a very different place.
Yes, it was.
President Obama was in the White House. There was no Syrian refugee crisis, and there was no Brexit. And now that the film is out, in this world, it's very resonant, very timely, because it talks about borders, artificial borders. It talks about the geopolitics of nations and decisions, more powerful nations interfering in the business of other nations. It talks about how ordinary people get caught up in what politicians are trying to decide, and where is the sort of human empathy for refugees. I think that it's also about what happens when politicians seek to divide us, because it's easier to rule us if we're all divided.
Mm. Now, you have too much experience not to know that when you were writing the script with your collaborators, that there are lines of dialogue in the film that are very expository.
Yeah.
That are laying out what's happening when, who's doing what to whom, and so on.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that you knew, you know what, I'm going to get some pushback on this. And people are going to say it's too explanatory, it's too expository, yet you make a decision. It must go in over other dialogue that might be more subtle or more nuanced. Can you just tell us about that kind of decision that a director does make?
Well, I'm talking about a very big historical event here. The 14 million people became refugees overnight. A whole nation was divided. A new country was born out of, quite a lot of turbulence and murder, destruction, rape. It was a horrific time. But for me, I needed to name it, and then I needed to move on from it. And it's a history that no one knows about. and people who were there, you know, there are people still alive who were there. My uncle, who was 6 years old at the time with my grandmother, he's here. He lives in Sydney, you know, but it still very much shadows his life, those experiences. So for me, it was about naming it and then moving on. And so 70 years later, creating a film that was conciliatory, you know, and human enough to help people move away from those divisions and heal.
Okay, now just very quickly, just on the performances, but I would like to know, say with Hugh Bonneville and with Gillian Anderson, do they bring their performances to the set, or do you have to eke it out of them? Just what's the general sense?
I think what's amazing about the cast is it's a very mixed cast: British, Indian, American, you know, but they all gel together as 1947 India. And Hugh Bonneville, Gillian Anderson, Michael Gambon, Simon Callow, these are big stalwarts of the British film industry, who all command a great presence on screen. Manish Dayal is the young actor who was in 100-Foot Journey with Helen Mirren. I saw that film. I really liked him a lot. And so I cast him off the back of watching him in that movie. And he brought an awful lot to the table in terms of empathy. And Alia is played by Huma Qureshi, who is a budding, up-and-coming big Bollywood actress, actually. She's had some big Bollywood success in India.
But sorry, go on.
But she gives a very human performance, very different to a Bollywood style. So in that sense, my job was to make sure all these people were bringing different actorial experiences to make them feel like they were all in the same film.
Now, you have pleaded with British Asians to go see the film.
Yes.
You have said quite loudly, British cinema needs British audiences.
Yes.
How did the film go? How is British cinema faring right now?
The film did very well. It's a struggle for us because it's a struggle to keep our screens basically on the onslaught of big Hollywood releases. So, for example, you know, my film was doing very well in England, but then when Logan came out, you know, or Beauty and the Beast, everybody wanted to go and see those films at the weekend, and so my film got squeezed, you know. So if I was in a multiplex of 5 screens, you know, more people would want to see Beauty and the Beast, let's say, than mine. So it's easier for the cinema not to show my film at that time and just have 5 screens dedicated to Beauty and the Beast. And I mean, I went to see Beauty and the Beast with my daughter and loved it, so I have nothing against the film, but it's the system. British films get pushed to the back. We ended up being a Monday to Thursday film, and we still did well, but we didn't have those weekend slots. And that, sadly, is where we're at with Britain and British cinema. You know, we are very, very poor cousin to Hollywood, and we just don't have enough of a culture, I think, that promotes and celebrates British cinema in the way that I would like to see it.
You have spoken about a sequel to Bend It Like Beckham. I think that you should make this film because the Britain that film is set in and that film reflects is very different to the Britain today.
Yeah.
Can you just tell me about the kind of Britain that film would be set in today?
Well, I have talked about the fact that I don't want to make a sequel about Bend It Like Beckham.
You don't want to make it?
No. So
I apologise.
No, that's okay.
I read it in the piece.
I know. Somewhere someone said that I did,
Okay.
but I wouldn't know where to start, to be honest with you.
Right.
Because for me, that film, they went to America, and I can't see it. I can't make a film unless I can see it. And I can't quite see that sequel. However, what we did do in England is the West End stage musical of Bend It Like Beckham. And that was a triumph. I loved working on that. I helped write the script with Paul for the book, as we say, for the musical. And I directed it and worked with I worked with Howard Goodall, one of our amazing composers in Britain, and Charles Hart, a lyricist who wrote the lyrics for Phantom of the Opera. And we had an amazing creative time creating that show because we were able to look at what it was that people love about the movie and what was the movie saying at that point. And even though it's set in 2002, because of course David Beckham no longer plays football, we set it in 2002, but it so stood up to contemporary England. And, you know, if anyone wants to see get an idea of multicultural England and London in particular, you only have to read the reviews of that show, because that show was a celebration of who we are, you know, in Britain. And all the theatre critics, I mean, it kind of got 5 stars, 4 stars across the board. And everybody talked about the celebration of Britain and how the film stands up to that.
And you would also credit that with the film's appeal as well. That's the values that it absolutely sends to the audience. I do have to ask you again, because you are very politically and socially astute, what's happening in Britain today? I mean, we're getting a lot of static and a lot of bad news about the rise of the right, about the flooding of Muslim culture, about Sharia law being actually accepted as a legitimate form of law. It's getting scary, and some commentators are saying to Americans, look at what's happening in England, in Britain, as a warning. Don't let it happen in America. What's your take on your homeland?
Well, I think that a lot of what you've just said there is baloney. I think that, yes, we do have a large number of people moving to the right after Brexit, you know, but these are impoverished people who don't have jobs, their children can't afford to buy houses. And I understand that, you know, and this is bad government. Bad government, basically. Every government should be in charge of making sure their citizens have, you know, the opportunity to work, decent housing, decent healthcare, and that their children, you know, they can educate their children and feel like their children have a future, you know. And by creating diversionary tactics, you know, governments then start blaming other people and don't look to the job in hand. We pay enormous taxes in Britain, and our taxes should be going towards safeguarding our communities, you know. But our government doesn't necessarily do that. It's easier to blame other people and scapegoat other communities, you know, and use the race card, you know, and create a culture of blame rather than a culture of opportunity. You have to look at Canada and how the you know, Trudeau there talks about these issues in Canada, you know, and you get a completely different view of leadership and governmentship there with a country that's equally diverse, you know, as England. And I think whilst in England we do have a Muslim community that is, you know, pockets of it are quite right wing, but we have the majority of Muslims in Britain are, you know, law-abiding British citizens who are as British as I am, you know. So I think that there is, like everywhere, you know, sometimes people pick up on things.
You have a media that has a certain agenda as well, and so...
And you don't want to know what people think Australians are like in England. You know, there's a view of what Australians are like, which is totally different to what Australia is actually like, you know.
Do you think that the appeal of Bend It Like Beckham had anything to do with 9/11? Because it came out the year after 9/11, and here was a film that was talking about going out, living a dream, about assimilation, about cultural blending. Do you think that there was a factor there?
I absolutely think there was a factor. I think that because the movie came out after a time, you know, when the world was really shattered, actually, by those events of 9/11, the world shifted, definitely. And here came this sort of very sweet, innocent film that tried to show a different side, that tried to show the positive side of us as humans connecting with each other. And I think the world needed something like that, a voice like that at the time. And so I think that's why the film sort of did so well all over the world. You know, it was that time. And I think with Viceroys House, it's a very timely film right now, because people are talking about borders and boundaries and geopolitics and nations, leaders, you know, operating in ways that a lot of the people, you know, don't want them to behave. And I think that my film is about people being aware of what's going on around them and trying to create that same kind of unity that Bend It Like Beckham did in the face of politicians trying to be divisive.